always, of course, joined by Dr. Rehnuma Karim, a professor and founder of the organization Heroes for All, and a championship-winning and inspiring coach, Jim Johnson, who joins us every single week, of course, in the lounge. But, Coach, you have brought along another guest today, so could you introduce him to our audience here?
Yeah, Gregg Vanourek is someone that I connected with, actually, where I heard him on another podcast, and I was so impressed that I had to reach out to him. We connected on LinkedIn. We actually had a chance to talk. So I'm going to give a little intro, and then I'll start with the first question. Gregg is an award-winning author, executive, and speaker on life design and leadership, and co-founder of the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living. Gregg presently lives in Colorado. And he actually has three outstanding books. One of the books is what I'm going to actually start. It's called The Triple Crown Leadership that he wrote with his father, Bob. It's an outstanding book, and I'm actually going to start with a question in just a minute. Gregg also teaches at the University of Denver and Stockholm Business School. He also was a tech startup executive at K-12. Gregg is a graduate of the Yale School of Management, London School of Economics, in Claremont McKenna College, where he got a BA. As I said, he presently lives in Colorado with his wife and two daughters I know he's very proud of. And they actually previously lived in Sweden for 10 years. So without further ado, Gregg, we're going to hop right in. First of all, we really appreciate you allowing us some time. We're looking forward to asking you some questions. As you know, the goal of our podcast is to help young and emerging leaders, and I know you'll be great with your wisdom to help our listeners with that. So with your book, Triple Crown Leadership, you talk about the 3 E's: excellence, ethical, and enduring. Can you just delve into that a little bit?
Absolutely. Coach Jim, thanks for having me. Great to be with you and Dr. Karim and John here. And so, yeah, my father and I did this multi-year project where we researched organizations around the world, financial performance, ethics, sustainability, most admired. And we did interviews with 61 leaders of organizations in, I think, 11 countries. And so we really developed from that a set of 5 practices for excellent leadership. But then it occurred to us sort of midway through the project of what is the ultimate aim here? And there was some kind of higher level meta thing going on. And we ended up zeroing in on sort of 3 things. One is, why not aspire to be excellent, achieve exceptional results and impact? Very, very difficult. Number 2, can you do that ethically, which is doing the right thing even when it's costly or hard, right? So can you get great results, but the right way? And then number 3, can you do both of those over time and endure and sustain them? And so operating, standing the test of time and operating sustainably. Each one of those is difficult, but all 3 is very difficult. So it's a very high standard, but you're going to spend a lot of time at work, and leadership is so important. So why not aspire to something very, very challenging, but truly worthy?
Excellent. You would say, Gregg, that probably Enron didn't meet your 3 E's?
Well, we're just having the 20-year anniversary right around now of that debacle. And we've had waves of scandals before that and after that. So we still have a lot of work to do. And what's interesting, it's funny you mention it, but a lot of people thought they were a great company. They were on the cover of Forbes and Fortune, and they had a great ethics policy, and they had some things. But it turns out that their culture was rotten. And a lot of things they had on paper where truly it was about, the smartest people in the room trying to take over the world. It was about ego. It was a corrupt culture. And of course, it all fell apart. So they did it the wrong way. It's a great lesson for the rest of us.
Right. And Gregg, I just have to say that I really enjoyed your talks. Like I was going through your TED Talk and your Quest versus Calling. And a lot of things resonated me, especially when I was talking to a lot of leaders in our country, also here. There was one CEO who was one of the head of a multinational company in the pinnacle of his success. So it was his quest to be a CEO of a top multinational company. But in that talk, he was saying that although I have achieved everything, I'm still always depressed. My family always complains that I'm depressed. No matter what I achieve, I don't find the joy in it. So I was wondering, we have so many definitions of success in our world today. So what is, I'm just curious, what is success to you?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Karim, thank you for that. And you really picked up on this theme of the quest was something that really emerged from my dad and I working on this leadership project. So that ended up being a kind of a surprising theme is what is your leadership quest? And then in my other work on life entrepreneurs, what is the quest of your life too? And I think to your point, it's actually a lot of people are surprised that many people, they achieve the pinnacle of what is deemed to be success at the top of the ladder. And it turns out that the treasure chest is empty. And so what we think is going to bring us a sense of success and peace and fulfillment is we're often actually mistaken in versus what will actually bring us a sense of overall life fulfillment. And so I like to think of having success for me is having the courage and the wisdom to live with integrity and to be who I really am, not what others think I should be or my parents or society, right? And to get out of my own shell, and this thing is about me and how I feel, and try to connect with something larger than me and contribute to something significant beyond me with other people. And then I think there's going to be joy as well as success and fulfillment.
Right. Sharing, like when you cannot share what you have learned with others or making an impact in a positive way, I think you don't find that joy. And I agree totally with you, because in my 40s, that is the time when I realized, like everybody said, oh, I've got my PhD, then I'm working at a university for 10 years. And then suddenly there is something missing, because I have to maintain some regulations and rules and this and that, and you have to be a professor. So that is the quest. But as soon like my father passed away and a lot of things happening, transitional things happening, I realized that when the students send me a card or thing like, Dr. Karim, you made a difference by seeing what I can do in my life, and I'm changing my path. That is when I realized that I can have a bigger purpose than just being a professor in an organization, in a university. And when I found my nonprofit, I think every day, although it's a struggle, but every day is a journey, and every day waking up with joy is a success to me. So sometime I'm just curious, like, why do you think purposeful knowing your purpose is very important for a leader?
Well, I think that knowing your purpose is very difficult for a lot of people, and a lot of people resist it because it sounds so abstract. It sounds so philosophical. And a lot of people try to kind of will themselves and, kind of make a list and kind of try to force it. And I think it's one of the things that you sort of actually more kind of discover or unearth or kind of uncover. I think we have a sense of purpose innate in us in our lives, and kind of clues throughout our life, even from when we're little kids, of the things that we're drawn to, the things that uplift us. But we're not good at paying attention to it. And we kind of take on the societal, you got to climb the ladder, you got to go, go, go. It's about this and that. And so we're kind of tuning out that deep, quiet voice, the calling, right? And we're kind of forcing it, and then we get lost. And then, as you say, often we'll hit a transition period, or something will happen. It'll cause us to kind of wake up again, and the question pops back up until, and we keep dismissing it. And hopefully eventually we finally start listening to that. So I think that having a sense of your purpose can be an incredible grounding force. It gets you out of your own ego, out of your own way, and it pulls you towards something, exciting and something meaningful. And then you can connect that as your foundation with your values. What do I value most? And how do I want to behave in the world? And other things like my strengths and aspirations, my vision of the good life, I think. And the other thing I'll say just real quickly is that purpose can be big P and little p. And I learned this from Richard Leiter, who works with me at the Vail Alliance for Purposeful Living. And so sometimes people are intimidated because it sounds like it's the big P. It's about being a Mother Teresa or a Gandhi or a Nelson Mandela. And of course, we want to aspire to have a great impact if we can, if we have privilege and opportunity, but it's also about the little P of the day-to-day interactions where you can make things a little bit better, where you can just be kind and thoughtful, and you can be a good friend, you can be a good colleague. And so it's about big P and little p purpose throughout your life, and the habit of purpose.
True.
I love it. Hey, Gregg, as far as like, because we talked a little bit with people that are just getting into leadership, what would be your best piece of advice for someone that's just starting a new leadership, whether taking over a team or whatever? What's your thoughts on that?
Coach, I was just teaching my Stockholm Business School students, and at the end of the program, I have them write their PLA, which is their personal leadership approach. And it's something that I didn't do back when I was starting, but I wish I had. And so taking the time to reflect and learn, look at different approaches, and actually write down, how do I want to lead? What is leadership at its best to me? What do I struggle with? And write down a kind of a statement. It could be a few sentences, it could be a paragraph, it could be a page or two, and then revisit it over time and kind of build on it to show that you're being intentional. And so I think that's a big one. And very few people do that. A couple other things that I mentioned, it's no one can do it alone. We all have so much to learn. And so either getting a mentor and or a group of advisors who you can just trusted people to be a sounding board, to give you some ideas, I think is very valuable. And the last thing I'll say, Coach, is that I think feedback is a superpower. And when I say that, what I mean is two-way feedback and positive and negative feedback. And so if I want to develop myself as a young leader, I need to be really good at asking for feedback and truly being open to receiving it and not defensive and whatnot. And because there's always things that I'm going to miss, right? But also getting good at giving other people feedback in a way that's helpful to them, in a way that they can receive it, because that's difficult with our kind of amygdala and the way our brains are wired. And feedback has to be positive and negative. You want to reinforce the good, right? Good job with this, keep this up and whatnot. But people need to learn about what they need to do better too. And I need to do that too. So, and that's something it's difficult. So people avoid it and they don't do it well. But if you learn to do it well, it's a superpower in leadership.
Absolutely. We're talking with Gregg Vanourek, a author and of course a TEDx speaker as well. Gregg, I'm curious about your international travels and your time in Sweden and how that molded you as a person. I know European culture in many ways very similar to ours here in the United States, but what was that experience like for you and your family, and how has that molded you to become a better leader?
Yeah. Well, thanks, John. It's a really great question, because it's been so meaningful for me to have that experience of, I traveled abroad earlier. I lived abroad for 1 year in graduate school in London, had a wonderful year, but this was a 10-year stint where my Swedish wife and I brought our 3-year-old daughter and our 1-year-old daughter to Sweden. And we didn't have things set up. We just said, we want to honor our international family and have a season of our lives over there too, to honor her family and her upbringing. And so first of all, it's a big world. It's a magnificent planet. There's so much richness and different cultures, and even like languages. Certain things don't even translate. There's like no way to say certain things because people think about and see the world differently. And so for me to get out of my bubble and to just experience, and by the way, I'll mention that, Europe and North America are very similar, but one of my big surprises is there's also a huge amount of differences. And it's like, you know, you don't expect them to be so deep or whatnot, but they are. And so it really challenged me, you know, with different ways of being in the world. And so, you know, Sweden is a very successful society. It's a very progressive, very family friendly, entrepreneurial, very quiet, as opposed to the kind of the American, you know, hard charging, you know, boom. And so I really, it caused me to say, wow, this is a very successful economy and society with a lot of great leaders and entrepreneurs. I can learn a lot here, you know, but things that I never considered. But I also needed to go through that challenge of figuring out my path in socially and professionally, you know, across the cultural divide. And that's a really good thing. If you can survive that, it's a really good thing to be able to do.
Right. And I totally agree, because I was traveling from, like, I did my master's in Netherlands and then coming to USA for my PhD, growing up in Bangladesh. It also helped me in a way to identify who I am with the challenges in a diverse setting. Like what are the biases that I'm hanging on to? What are the things I need to let go? Did you have this kind of like a self-evaluation when you are traveling in different parts of the world?
Oh, Dr. Karim, I so did. I resonate 100% with what you just said. And so, yeah, it definitely caused me to kind of reflect on who I am. So in one way, for example, is, you know, I've always wanted to look forward to being a father. And then when my wife, Christina, and I had children, it was such an amazing thing and so important to us to honor that. And in Sweden, it really, and so I've always wanted to be a present father who's closely connected with, you know, our girls, right? And, you know, and where we can share and be open. And in Sweden, you know, it's a very gender equal society. And, you know, and so it you know, caused me in many ways, it stretched me to be even more involved and to, you know, think about the household even more as a partnership in ways that was really good. The other thing I'd say is that there's this aspect of kind of starting over. You know, you go to a new country and I don't have a network there professionally. You know, I've got some family and some friends. I mean, I had a little bit. And so who am I if, you know, if you're kind of here operating in your network and you kind of, you're at this level of achievement and all of a sudden you got to go kind of start over a little bit, that can be tough on your ego. That can be tough, you know, and to kind of be able to, you know, how much do you kind of suffer for that? Or can you still be okay and say, you know what, I haven't built up the new stuff yet to the way I want it. It's going to take some time because it always takes time. But am I still okay, even though the circumstances are difficult right now? Or because the circumstances are difficult, does that mean that I feel like a failure or that I feel, you know, bad about myself? So it's this kind of trick that our brain plays on us. We all go through ups and downs in life. Does that mean we're a bad person when things aren't going well for us, right? So what's that foundation that we have? So that was a real learning for me.
Wow, that's resilience. You also learn to be resilient as a leader when you are going through all those experiences.
Yes.
Hey, Gregg, with you know, you've interviewed a lot of leaders. I'm sure you've read many different books about leadership and that kind of thing. Dead or alive, who would be one leader you would love to interview? And what would be the one or two questions that you would want to ask immediately?
Well, that's a tough one, Coach, because there's so many people that would be amazing. So I love this thought experiment we're doing here. But one that comes to mind now, because I'm reading The Eighth Habit by Stephen R. Covey, would be Covey.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, most people know the 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, which is a classic. If you haven't read it, you must read it, right? But I hadn't actually read The Eighth Habits. Came out a while ago, and it's also very, very powerful. And so I think Dr. Covey would be a wonderful person to interview. And you know, I admire him as an author and a thought leader, but also just as a human being.
Yes.
And so, I would want to have a conversation with him to learn from him, about thoughts on being a good father and a present father. He had a big family and worked with his family and the business and some of the books, and very intentional, I think, about that. I'd want to ask him about thoughts on being a good person, because he just seems like he didn't just write about it. He studied it and he lived it, and he suffered through, and he made mistakes, but then he learned from it. He just kept developing himself in ways. They just leap through the page when you read about it, or when you see him talk. And then I think he was also a very spiritual man, and faith was an important part of his life. And so I would ask for thoughts on walking a spiritual journey, and I think he'd have a lot to add. And of course, he wrote about that in many of his books.
I got to follow up, because Dr. Covey is one of my all-time favorites, and I got to share a quick story with you, because 7 Habits is one of the books I always recommend, and I have read The 8th Habit, which was I agree that was very powerful as well. And he was on my bucket list. I saw Dr. Covey speak live once, but never got a chance to meet him in person. And the ironic thing is, about 9 months after he passed away, I had gotten to know some people in Franklin Covey, and I actually was invited to speak to the Global Leadership Summit. But unfortunately, he had passed away. I did meet some of his family members, but I'm right with you. I'm a huge Covey family. He was a really special man, for sure. So
absolutely. And if I could just share something too about that family, is when my dad and I were writing our leadership book, Triple Crown Leadership,
right.
It was a leadership book, but it was also a father-son project. And we were thinking about, who would we love to have to write the foreword? And there's so many great people, out there, and we had the idea of this would be amazing, but what if Stephen R. Covey and his son, Stephen M.R. Covey, as a father and son, would write the foreword to our father? And this was just a dream, because we admire them both and the family so much. And we said, let's just go for it. Let's just see, let's just ask. And they said yes. Wow. And it was one of the last things they did together as father-son before he passed away. And they said it was a special moment for them too. And it was just, it was such we were just so honored.
And this is such an interesting point also. Sometimes you have to reach out. We are often afraid that, what if they say no? And we don't reach out. So sometimes we have to have that courage to reach out and ask. And you never know what can happen. So this is amazing. And I just wanted to piggybacking. I was reading through your discovery mode, and I was wondering, there are so many developed countries nowadays, and we hear that the suicide rate is so high in those developed countries. You have every provision of wealth, healthcare, and all those things, but still people are unsatisfied, and especially among the young people, the suicide rate is very high. So I was wondering, when you were talking about the discovery mode, so as a leader or as a person, why do you think we need to, instead of climbing mode, we need to go for the discovery mode? How can that help us?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I think that in a lot of our societies, there's a meaning crisis at some point when you're fortunate enough to have the basics met and you're living okay, but then it's kind of well, what about the spiritual nourishment or questions of deeper purpose? And I think in a lot of our societies, the unwritten, unspoken thing, almost like you're a fish in a fishbowl and you're swimming in the water, you don't even know it's water. It's this notion that climbing mode is the way to live your life. And the whole point of life is to just climb up a ladder and to kind of get to the top and get more money and more prestige. And that's what success in life is all about. And it's so pervasive, we don't even think about it, right? And there's nuance here, because climbing mode, I think, has value. It's not all bad by any means. If I'm climbing, I'm learning, I'm growing, developing, I'm being challenged. I'm probably earning more money, which I can, give away, or I can do fun things and travel and see the world. So there's all this value, right? But I think there's this extreme where you get so lost in climbing that it becomes it becomes unhealthy, right? You're addicted and you're working all the time, right? You get disconnected from other people because you're just so focused on climbing up my ladder. And then, it becomes an ego trip of epic proportions. It's all about me getting to where I want to go at the top. And so I'm not contributing to other people. And so this is actually a recipe that's pulling me away from a good life, which is vitality, connection, and contribution. And so I think there's a time and a place for climbing mode, but this notion of discover mode is first, who am I? What do I care about? What am I good at? What do I love and get lost in? What do I want to do in the world? And so if I spend some time, especially young in my formative years, discovering, and then I can climb and go attack it. But then I'm going to need to discover again. So it's this kind of iterative process of bouncing back and forth of action and reflection, warrior, sage, discover, climb, right? But it's not just climb, because that can do some damage and you can leave you feeling very empty at the top of that ladder.
And your ladder has to be against the right wall.
Yes.
If you're climbing the wrong wall, and then in the top, you realize, like, where am I? This is not the place that I was supposed to be.
Right. And maybe there are multiple walls there, and there are multiple ladders. This can be fun. This can be kind of fun but sometimes it's so focused on this one thing that it becomes destructive.
True.
Yeah. We're talking with Gregg Vanourek, of course, the author and TEDx speaker here on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. We're going to take a quick break and be right back to wrap up our discussion. And back here inside the lounge with Dr. Karim, Coach Jim Johnson, and our guest, Gregg Vanourek. And I'm John Goehring. And Gregg, you were just touched on some powerful points just before our break there about climbing and how pervasive that is in our, especially Western culture here. What advice to a young leader would you give if they've tasted some success, someone in their 20s, say, who's already tasted that success and have kind of become addicted to the climb? What advice would you give to try to break free from that and, like you said, have that better balance, which includes some climb, but a more well-rounded life?
I think that you have to learn to listen to your life. Parker Palmer wrote about this, author and educator, and he wrote a book it's a beautiful little book called Let Your Life Speak. And it draws on some Quaker wisdom from his faith tradition, but back to this kind of voice, right? So often we're kind of forcing it, right? And we're on a force march and we're falling into all these traps. And this is kind of a focus area of my recent work. There's really common traps that we fall into. We're obsessed with climbing mode. We're lost in ego. We're feeling behind, and so we're panicking. We're overwhelmed with choices. These kinds of, or we're drifting through our life. And the thing is, we're not aware of the traps typically. And so it's really good to have personal practices, I think, renewal practices, where we're pausing, where we have an intentional morning, where we take breaks, where we get out in nature, where we have a kind of a weekly check-in and a monthly review and a quarterly and an annual look back. And it also helps to have conversations with a group of trusted advisors, a spouse or a friend or a group who can sometimes they just need to smack you over the head and say, come on, give me a break, get over yourself, or my God, you look really tired. You're just working all the time. Is this really what you want to do? And so getting that external voice sometimes is really helpful too. But one of the people we interviewed for our book, Life Entrepreneurs, in terms of those renewal practices, he called it his secret office. As an entrepreneur, he would kind of take like 30 different days during the year. Now, these weren't holidays. These weren't vacation days. He would actually go out like on his kayak all day and go hiking and kayaking and just be out there and just live, right? And he said he loved those days. And when he came back the next day, he always had his best business ideas and operated better as a leader because he had invested in himself. And I think we're too proud, and we're too we're not humble enough about our own limits. And if we get tired, if we get stressed, and so those practices of leading yourself first are so critical for leaders and just for all of us as people.
And just a quick follow-up on that, Greg, you're talking about getting outside. Now, when you're young, when you're a kid, say, when you're in your teens, even earlier than that, you have maybe more innocent, you're more willing to do those types of things. But isn't it true that from what your experience, have you seen that once you hit your 20s and once you hit this professional area of your life and you taste a little bit of that success, is that kind of an addictive thing where people just begin to work harder and harder, and now they're on the climb and now they're tied to that climb?
Yeah, that's a real problem. There's this addiction. It's this ego just being fed, and that's just kind of one part of you. And there's a fear aspect of that too, a fear of not being good enough and a fear of, of failing. And so it can kind of drive you to be just, and I think it can be very, very unhealthy over time to kind of live that way. And there's actually interesting research that we make poor decisions when we're tired and when we're in that mode, and we make unethical decisions when we're in that mode. And so there are a lot of leaders who say the worst moments they had were when they weren't leading themselves and they were caught up in that, and they just weren't able to get that perspective and that renewal. So this is really important for our long-term performance and our ethics and our quality of life and our integrity.
True. And you're so right. And we are also often pushed to think that self-reliance is everything. You have to be independent. You have to fight on your own. You have to be a lone wolf. But you mentioned self-reliance might not be the way. So why do you think for a leader, might not be the right way?
Yeah, and again, there's nuance here because sometimes we do need to be self-reliant, and we do need to be able to stand up for ourselves, and and be courageous, as you talked about earlier, and fight for the right things and whatnot. But being overly self-reliant and disconnected, again, is a recipe for failure, for poor leadership, and for regret in your life. There's a great study from the Harvard study of adult development. It's a longitudinal study where they've been researching what makes a good life, where people looking back over the whole sweep of their life have better health, better overall outcomes in terms of family life, professional, these kinds of things, live longer, and it's been going on for 80 plus years, this study.
Wow.
They've had 3 different research directors, over this thing, and they've looked at everything. And there are many factors, but the most important one, according to the research directors, is the quality of your relationships with people is the thing that ultimately is most determinative of an overall sense of life satisfaction and kind of overall wellness. And so the summary version of 80 years of research is happiness is love. And so, my dad taught me that business is a set of relationships. Life is a set of relationships. And, to John's question earlier, if we get so caught up in succeeding and this kind of thing, sometimes we lose touch with our loved ones, with our friends. But it's those relationships with our family and our colleagues, in the great work, the great challenges that you looking back, you're going to say, wow, we did some remarkable things, or we supported each other through difficult times, whatever it was. So there's a lot of beauty there. There's a lot of richness there. So let's honor that in our leadership and in our life.
Yeah, the sense of
Great
community. That is so important.
I was going to say, Greg, just to piggyback on, because we are so agreeing with you with relationships. But, you hear a lot, and I'd be curious with your work in recent years. Obviously, we're still in a pandemic. And one of the things you hear a lot about in leadership is building team culture. So I'm curious if you had any keys you believe in helping build team culture. And I'm going to actually add an addendum because of the fact that we're in a pandemic where a lot of people are now not working in the same place. A lot of people are working from home. Is there anything that you've learned in helping the culture in a different scenario now?
Yeah. So when my father and I wrote Triple Crown Leadership, culture is just so important, Heifetz says the work is through the people. And so if you have a good business model, a good strategy, good operations, but if you don't have a good culture, everything runs through the culture. So first of all, I'd say, do you have a shared purpose, shared values, and shared vision that were collaboratively elicited, but truly inculcated throughout the organization, where you really communicate them, you use them, you make decisions off them? It's not just pablum, it's not just jargon, right? That whole process of doing that, right? The second one is we say delegation is fine. Empowerment is a little bit better, but we say unleash people. There's so much talent and potential out there in people that is being wasted, and we're not tapping into it. And part of it is because people are waiting for the manager to tell them what to do, and people don't have a lot of autonomy and authority. So unleash your people. As long as they operate according to your shared values, let them go, right? Give them an automatic license to lead, to initiate, to innovate, right? And then just watch them soar. And they're going to love it. They're going to stay. They're going to do great things. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes. That's fine. You debrief it, you work it through, and then unleash them again, right? And so that's it. And then the other thing I'd say, and this might be a little surprising, is mind for conflict. A lot of people avoid conflict, but Patrick Lencioni has taught me that conflict is really good. It's essential, but it's the healthy conflict. It's not the yelling and screaming but it's about, we disagree sometimes. Sometimes we need to talk things through, or it's unclear. And setting a holding environment where people can have those debates and disagree and fight it out a little bit, but respectfully, and then come to a decision, and then all agree to try it, and then see how it goes. That's powerful. But most people, it's so hard that people avoid it, and so you end up with this missing gem, because the good stuff is there. It's in the conflict often.
Yeah,
Because,
that's a powerful point. Yeah. And Greg, I just wanted to ask you here as we get close to winding down, you talked earlier about how you tell your students at Stockholm, to end up writing their personal leadership statement. What is yours, and why do you have your personal leadership statement? Why is that so important?
Yeah. And the thing that's been the most helpful to me is, I don't remember when, I think it was about 12 years ago or something like that. I wrote down my personal purpose statement, my personal values, my personal vision of the good life, my personal strengths, my aspirations, and then some other fun things like hobbies and things that I want to do. And then over the years, I've been kind of revisiting that. And so my personal purpose, for example, is helping people lead good lives. And I'd like you to define what you mean by a good life. But for me, it's something like a life of courage, integrity, service, something like that. And I found that sort of taking the time to write down these statements of purpose, values, vision, strengths, and aspirations has caused me to be clearer on them. It's caused me to come back to them as safe harbor when if I go abroad and I kind of lose a sense of self and I have to, kind of find my bearings again. It kind of grounds me, and it motivates me, right? And so it brings me back to who I am. And so I'm less likely to kind of mimic just somebody else's leadership or to get pulled off into this trap. It doesn't, life is imperfect. And so it's, it doesn't solve everything. But I found that even that simple exercise of writing it down, sharing it with people that I love and asking for feedback has been very powerful for me.
Right. And you have mentioned in one of your talks that we should approach life like a business model. We are with the startup and all those things. We have this business model in one page, what to do, problem, solution, and this and that. But we don't do that. We don't like pause and do that for ourselves, our own life. So what would be one of the key steps? What are your suggestions? Some key steps towards becoming that entrepreneur of life?
Yeah, well, there's an important point there about the business model question that you're raising, because you're right. I think often we don't take the time to reflect and be clear, right? And so then we're just wandering, right?
Right.
But the other thing is it's business model, just like you said, but it's not business plan. So it's not that I have a 40-page plan for my whole life and it's all mapped out, because there's too many variables, and that's highly unlikely. So it's a simpler one-page business model that's flexible. And the whole point is lean startup is try things, run little experiments, get feedback, and then pivot, right? And so with that, I'd say, the steps to be a life entrepreneur, and this is another book that I wrote with Christopher Goehring. First, it's that personal core identity, the things we were just talking about with John. It's purpose, values, strengths and passions. What are my needs? What are my aspirations? Right. And then it's having a vision of the good life. And then it's having the courage to try and to go for it and to risk failure and these kinds of things. Then it's about being adaptive and persistence, right? And so kind of sticking with it, but kind of being flexible, right? And then it's about another thing we call pervasive service. So it's an ethic of contribution as a defining feature of our lives. And then it's also the last thing I'll mention, kind of a summary of the whole, we interviewed 55 people for this, but it's what we talked about earlier. It's renewal. We're human, so we've got our limits. We need to sleep. We need to take care of our bodies. We need to move. We need to get outside, right? And this is going to enrich us. So we need good renewal practices. Otherwise, the things are going to fray at the edges.
True.
Very powerful. Well, Gregg, I know we're about out of time. John and Rehnuma, you got anything else you want to run by before we wrap up? And before I pass that along, Gregg, I just want to say that, boy, your thoughts were really powerful, and we were so grateful to have you on our podcast today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you renewed us, us to new thoughts and new ideas. And thank you so much for the wonderful insight. And hopefully our listeners are going to get so much information that they could also transform and renew their life from this conversation. Thank you so much.
I hope so. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to echo those statements made by Coach and Dr. Karim. Now, Gregg, in closing here, if we want to get in touch with you, if we want to check out some of the work you've done, maybe your latest book, the book you wrote with your father, give us a little bit of information on getting in touch with you.
Yes. Thank you for asking. And so I live online at greggvanourek.com. And so Gregg, and then Vanourek, Vanourek.com. And there you can find information about our books and other bunch of free resources about leadership and life entrepreneurship. And then I'm also active on LinkedIn, and we've got a Triple Crown Leadership Facebook group if people want to join. And on Twitter, you can find me at G Vanourek, where I'm posting a lot of great resources and books that I come across, etc. So I really welcome people to join the conversation and to reach out.
Very useful information. And check out below here in the show description, you'll see Gregg Vanourek's website, and you get in touch there through the website and social media. Great to have you on, Gregg. Thank you so much for your time. And we really have, as Rehnuma said, we really have been renewed by talking with you.
Thank you. Cheers.
And as always, thank you for listening to the Limitless Leadership Lounge. Remember to leave us a review if you haven't already on your favorite platform, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, maybe, or one of those Spreaker people. We appreciate you, and we will catch you on the next one for another excuse me. We're going to recut that and cut that out for another tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders.